7th released in exchange for about 1,000 pounds. Wanted to first talk to you about this ceasefire, but I didn't want to necessarily just talk about the details of it, although they are important. Upwards of 30 plus prisoners of war that the resistance in Palestine had taken after October 7th release in exchange for about 1,000 Palestinian prisoners being released. I wanted to talk to you about the role of the resistance here overall in pressuring this, because after the fall of Syria, there was a lot of ill feelings, a low mood. Israel was on the march and dominating, but report after report came out after the fall of Syria of Israel's exhausted army. And then the resistance, despite having Syria as no longer possibly a hub for transporting weapons, started to go on the offensive with numerous ambushes, including the most recent one, which took about 10 Israeli soldiers. You also have Yemen firing hypersonics. Everyone is talking about Donald Trump being the one who pressured this. But what are the conditions that have led to the possibility of a ceasefire in Gaza?
I think we have to look at the declared goals of the Zionists in all of these war fronts. So the declared goal in Gaza was the destruction of Hamas and its military wing. That didn't happen. Their goal for Lebanon was the destruction of Hezbollah's capabilities. That didn't happen. And their goals for Syria was the stopping of transfer of weapons. And I would say that didn't happen, because in reality right now, Syria is a free-for-all, and anyone can cross the border without any checkpoints or anything from Lebanon into Syria. There is weapons markets everywhere in the towns and cities across the border from Lebanon, where you can buy weapons by the kilo right now. And that includes anything from a tank to the Kalashnikovs and everything in between, ATGMs, mortars, whatever you want to. And I'm not being hyperbolic when I'm saying you can buy them by the kilo. It's not even what the brand or the sophistication of the weapon is that's determining the prices. You can buy a Kalashnikov for $60, $70, and you can buy a tank for a couple of $1,000s. This is how cheap it is right now, and everybody's bringing the weapons into Lebanon. So the stockpiles of the Syrian military that were looted by the Wahhabi death squads, the bandits that work for the CIA, the Turkey, and so on, are right now out in the black market and flooding Lebanon. So all of those goals that the Israelis put for themselves have not been achieved. Now, in terms of pressure on the Zionists by Trump, I think this is all a ruse, a propaganda ploy. We know that basically Netanyahu is accepting right now the exact same deal that Biden put forward. So Netanyahu had promised Trump to make the ceasefire coincide with his arrival as the new emperor, and that's what's happening. And this media coverage that is claiming that Netanyahu got pressured or that Trump's envoy was rude to the Israelis and threatening, those are all propaganda ploys to give Trump what he wants, which is this idea that he's a strong emperor, that he can bully the vassals and colonial holdings of the United States into doing whatever he wants to, unlike that sissy Biden, basically. But in reality, this has all been designed prior to hand.
Yeah, and I think negating the role of the axis of resistance, which had been declared dead, is a huge mistake. Even the Wall Street Journal, just days before the ceasefire talks gained momentum, was talking about how Hamas was rebuilding, how Mohammed Sinwar was building up a even fiercer fighting force, maybe than had been predicted after the assassination, the murder of Yahya Sinwar, and of course the fall of Syria. So talk about this, because there's reports even in Israeli media saying that Hamas and the resistance now is likely building up a force of 10, 20,000 more fighters as we speak. And this isn't even to get to those other forces, for example, Hezbollah, which has had some time during this so-called ceasefire in Lebanon to recover, and has vowed that it will also fight if it has to, if the ceasefire doesn't take hold in Gaza. And of course, we can't trust the Israeli regime. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so definitely now inside Gaza, any Palestinian that was, let's say, pacifist before the genocide and or critical of Hamas and Islamic Jihad or any of the parties that carry arms in resistance, having lived senseless genocide and deliberate targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructure, that radicalizes anybody. And we've seen many social media posts by people saying exactly that. Hey, I was like for nonviolent resistance before, but seeing my family being killed, anyone that gives me a weapon, I'll carry it right now against the Israeli. That's the common, I think, feelings within the population in Gaza. And that is making it very easy for the resistance groups to recruit new members. And in fact, they probably have too many applications for people to join in comparison to, let's say, how fast they can absorb them and or how many personal weapons that they can hand over to these new fighters. And the Israelis are facing a different kind of fighters right now. Those who were trained before the genocide and the motivations that they had to fight the Israelis are different than the motivation of those who are survivors of this genocide and are choosing to carry arms, which have a much higher will to fight and to try to avenge their lost ones and their life that was lost under these conditions. So I think the strength of the fighters is now even more than it was before, and we see that playing out in these ambushes inside the north parts of Gaza that are historic, heroic actions that we see. The videos of are unbelievable, how these ambushes are being conducted. And when we're talking about the north of Gaza, this is like an area that has been occupied for months now, ethnically cleansed completely. Everything is broadly destroyed, and there's still the Israelis are falling into these ambushes, including a few hours ago there was another ambush. We don't know yet the numbers of dead. The Israelis said called it like a security incident in the north of Gaza, but it's probably like the ones that was reported yesterday and the day before. At least 5 to 10 Israeli soldiers are dead in those attacks.
Yeah, there have been reports for months and months, arguably for over a half a year, Laith, about the Israeli regime's military and its status, how the reservists, who are just settlers who want to make money and work and settle and live on Palestinian territory, they are sent to essentially kill, maim, and then, of course, go into what is rubble guerrilla urban warfare. Like this is creating huge problems for the Israeli military. Laith, talk about this, because you have Israel at the same time saying they are going to expand the war. They're lying. They're saying they're bombing Yemen, but it's the U.S. and the U.K. who's bombing Yemen. But they say they're going to bomb Yemen. They're going to destroy the Ansar Allah movement. Then they say they're going to bomb Iran. They're going to bomb the nuclear sites. But yet Hamas is resurging. How do you square this circle, Laith, in the context of what's going on right now with the ceasefire? Because there's a lot of chest thumping, a lot of killing, but also it seems like a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Israeli military has been defeated resoundingly since October 7th. They lost their top generals and their top units on October 7th. And since then, although we may think that it's only the Israelis that are fighting on the ground inside Gaza and or in Lebanon, the reality is much further than that. The reality is that the United States and all of the NATO or Zionist empire components have been directly involved in the war, even on the ground with special forces, as well as thousands upon thousands of mercenaries. And so while we hear, let's say, the Israelis admitting 5 or 10, let's say, dead yesterday in one of these ambushes, the resistance always says the number is at least 3 times that. And maybe the Israelis are telling half the truth. They're hiding some of their dead, but they're also not reporting any of the mercenaries and or special forces from the alliance behind them that are also being liquidated in these battles. So the Israelis have lost the battle in the air against Hezbollah. They lost the battle in the air and in the sea against Yemen and against Iran. And the United States and the whole Zionist empire government from Washington, D.C., has been fighting this war fully. It's not only bombarding Yemen, it's the bombardment of Lebanon. Israel didn't have enough jets to do the damage that it did or to conduct 6,000 air raids in one day. Israel has just a few hundred aircrafts. Of course, the American and British and French and Italian and Saudi and others air forces were also involved in the bombardment of Lebanon. Similarly, the attacks on Syria after the fall of the Assad government, those were not conducted by Israel alone. And so I think the Zionists are having a crisis moment, a mental crisis moment, because on the one hand, they tell the whole world that they are the chosen people. And they tell themselves that, and they tell their children that, and they say they are basically the best thing since sliced bread, okay? This is what they believe of themselves, and they are the best fighters and the best intelligence and the best doctors and the best lawyers and the best actors, and everybody else doesn't have anything, okay? All the Nobel Prizes should go to them. And suddenly they're faced with a reality where a barefoot fighter in Gaza can take out a whole battalion of them. And the Yemeni resistance, thousands of kilometers away, can target their most important sites in minutes. So they're having this psychosis moment, and you can see it playing out in the social media. And how it's playing out on the ground is that these psychotic Zionists that are, being defeated when they're face to face with the Palestinian resistance or the Lebanese resistance, are taking it out on civilians. They're just, throwing bullets and grenades at random targets and feeling, returning their manhood somehow that way.
This feels like Israel's Vietnam moment in many respects. As we're talking about this, Israel is actually attempting to expand the conflict, get deeper and deeper into war. And I want your thoughts on this. Norman Finkelstein, I have a lot of respect for Norman Finkelstein, but he makes the argument that this isn't a war. He said it's simply a genocide. In my estimation, it is both. You have Israel committing a genocide, not out of a position of strength, in my estimation, but as a way to get its way without having to do what a lot of empires have had to do in the past, which is build up a stable, if not exploitative and still violent system. Israel cannot do that. Israel cannot defeat Hamas. They've already shown they can't defeat Hamas or the Palestinian resistance as a whole, let alone everyone else that they are trying to expand into, this greater Israel, which I think is a farce. I think it cannot actually exist. Your thoughts?
Yeah, look, sometimes Norman Finkelstein and other commentators in the West, because they're not on the ground here and seeing facts, and they don't understand Palestinian or Arabic culture in general, they make these mistakes of overstating the power of Zionism and empire and underestimating the indigenous. Okay, we saw that a few weeks ago also after the fall of Syria, how some commentators were saying, oh, we give up on the Arabic people. I don't, and it's really hugely problematic because for the last 80 years, since the end of World War II, there hasn't been a people that given more sacrifices in the fight against colonialism and imperialism than the Arabic people as a whole. Millions of people in Algeria, in Libya, in Egypt, in Syria, in Iraq, in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Yemen, died in the battle against imperialism and colonialism and didn't give up yet. There's no other nation on this planet that gave this sacrifice, while at the same time the Western populace have given zero sacrifices against colonialism and imperialism. The best that I can expect from them as a Palestinian is to talk something supportive of my liberation. But I can never depend to ever sacrifice anything to carry arms against Zionism, like the Germans carried arms against the Nazis, or like white Americans carried arms with John Brown against slavery, okay? Up until now, 80 years, not one Jewish European carried arms against Zionism. So it's fine for me when Norman Finkelstein or other Jewish Westerner commentators stand beside the Palestinians and support our struggle. But I am not fine when they cross the line and they think that they can tell the Palestinians how to liberate themselves and or belittle us to a humanitarian issue. I don't need Finkelstein's pity and or any Jewish Europeans' pity. I need them to man up, to actually act in rebellious ways, not just talk. Talk is cheap. Let's see one Jewish European or one North American die for the liberation of Palestine.
Yeah, well, it always certainly raises my eyebrows when I see a negation of the resistance. I think that is a huge mistake because on the one hand, yes, Israel has decimated Gaza, but at the same time, the numbers do not lie. And it's not even just numbers. It's also, we see it. They're recording it for us. The resistance is recording. They're telling us that they are fighting the Israeli regime, and they're doing it quite effectively. They, despite the technological prowess we see in the differences, we see that the resistance has grown and that the Israeli regime, the military, while it has the capacity to murder, it doesn't have the capacity to defeat any one of its so-called adversaries that stand in its way toward a greater Israel. Your assessment, Laith?
Yeah, and they would have been defeated October 8th if the whole collective empire didn't come to save them. They would have ran out of weapons long time ago. They would have packed up and ran back to Europe and North America, these colonists, if the West didn't save them. While the Palestinians and the Lebanese, who did they have behind them other than Iran? There's nobody else. And Iran that is sanctioned and besieged. I mean, look at the huge, disparity between power and finances and weapons, and we're still at a standstill. So if only one component of the empire ceased supporting the Zionist colony, it would have collapsed. For instance, if Turkey, out of this imperialist domain, decided to stop the shipments of food and gas and oil to Israel, Israel would have collapsed within a month. If the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Jordanians didn't build a substitute supply route to the Sinai Canal, Israel would have collapsed. This is not talking about even the deliveries of weapons or anything. Without that, it would have collapsed. So the odds were huge. The odds are like 1,000,000 to 1 almost. And we're still at a standstill and drawing them into, into a draw, basically. This is unprecedented, I think, in terms of the odds and the successes, even though we are very sad. The genocide, we're sad. I am, as a Syrian, heartbroken that I've lost my homeland to the packs of wolves of the Wahhabi death squads that the United States controls.
The odds were certainly grim when you look at it from the surface, but then when you see what has transpired, while there's been death, there's been destruction, there's also been just a reaffirmation of how you are having the ruling establishment of the empire itself talk about a war of attrition. When I hear the words war of attrition, I don't generally think, a resistance war versus a resistance, like anti-colonial resistance versus the most powerful military forces that have ever existed in human history. Generally don't think about that if you look at it from the outside, but that is exactly what has happened.